Hello, and welcome to this episode of Self-Made. I'm your host, Dee Brown CEO. Joining me on the show today is a historian and educator. Please help me welcome Corey Curtis to Self-Made. Corey, I'm glad you took time out your day to be on the show with me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so Corey, you got a lot of interesting things that I want to discuss on the show, but I want to start just kind of with your early years. Let's take a walk back in time and tell my viewers about your early life, where you grew up and what your childhood was like.
Absolutely. I was born and raised here in Peoria, Illinois. I was always fascinated with history, and anytime we'd go to any kind of bookstore or garage sale, if I'd see kind of history books, I'd try to finagle them out of my parents or grandparents, whoever I was with, and the passion never stopped. I enjoyed history up until where I'm currently at now.
So what was high school like here in Peoria? What were some of the challenges you faced as a kid growing up here, and what was it like going to high school?
So going to high school, I went to Manual High School. Some of the challenges, it was not the best funded high school. Resources were limited, and that definitely had an impact on the classes being offered. We had great teachers. I remember one teacher did what he could. He organized a history club, and we would have weekly meetings where we discussed certain topics. He always tried to get some kind of field trip for those who were involved, but due to kind of budget constraints, that never really materialized. But it was still definitely a good experience. And the history teacher, his name was Mr. Manioni. He definitely impacted the way I think about history now.
Why do you think you developed such a passion for history?
I think it's the stories. If you go beyond the history as just names and dates, there's fascinating stories in each part of history, and if you can tell it right, then it's just a great place to start. To read the lives of some of these people that we never met, or we can't even comprehend what they went through, but yet we can read about how they experienced life, and possibly get a better understanding of the world around us and ourselves.
Now, I know that your journey to become an educator wasn't just the smoothest transition. I know that you started school and you had to go back and finish your degree later. Can you talk to me about college and what that was like, and then what were the circumstances that made you finishing your education kind of difficult?
Yes. So I graduated. I went to college at first ICC. It was a community college here in the Peoria area. Then I went to Bradley University, where I got a history degree. And once I graduated, I didn't really know what to do with a history degree. I started working at Caterpillar up until the 2008 recession occurred. Once I got laid off, I wanted to go back to school. I went to school for business and economics and double majored in that, and worked in the business environment for quite some time. I eventually got a job as an economist, and I worked there for about 7 years. And then the passion for history was still too strong. I had been working with the Peoria Historical Society, which kind of emboldened my passion even more. So I very abruptly quit my job and enrolled back in school to get my teacher's license, and that's where I am now.
Now, when you went back to school, you had 2 children at that time, correct?
Yes, correct. When I went to get my teacher's license, I had right now they're 12 and 9.
Uh-huh. So how did that impact your ability to go back and complete your degree?
Well, it was definitely more difficult with kids. Fortunately, they were old enough to be self-sufficient, but they were at that age where they're getting into sports and extracurriculars. So the evenings would get a little busy. So you definitely had to manage your time and think about when you needed to have your assignments done. I tried to get as much done as early as possible, just in case things would come up. Kids get sick, appointments happen, so it definitely was some finagling with time for a little bit.
Yeah. So tell me about the Peoria Historical Society. What is the mission there, and what do you do as a volunteer?
So the Peoria Historical Society, I've been a part of I'm going to my 6th year now, and our mission is to preserve the history and tell about Peoria's past. And when I would drive around Peoria and look at these buildings, and I just think, what's the story behind these buildings? And finally, I decided to join the Historical Society, and I started learning about all these areas of Peoria. And it turned out Peoria has a very fascinating history that I would say it's on par with some of the larger cities.
Really?
Peoria was. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish.
Peoria was the whiskey capital of the world. I think everybody inside Peoria knows that we produce the most whiskey for almost 100 years. In fact, tax receipts show that during the Civil War, the sales tax on whiskey paid over 50% of the war efforts for the North. So just that alone is just a remarkable detail. Yeah. And that's all part of Peoria's history.
Now, I know that you have a deep interest in the Underground Railroad and abolitionist movement. How did you develop that interest?
So, as I said, a lot of stories from Peoria are very well known, like the whiskey, our theaters, our healthcare, our manufacturing. That was all well known. Everyone who's in Peoria knows those stories well. What they don't know are the stories of the Underground Railroad and abolitionist movement here in Peoria. So when I first joined the Historical Society, I started volunteering at one of our historical homes here on Moss Avenue. And I learned of a man by the name of Moses Pettengill, and found out that he was not only an abolitionist, but he was actually a conductor in the Underground Railroad. And that fascinated me, and I wanted to learn more. But I found out that getting information about him was, and the Underground Railroad here, was very difficult because it hadn't ever been really researched. So I decided that I needed to start recording these stories and pulling them out from the graveyard before they disappeared entirely. And so for about 2 years now, I've been doing presentations on Peoria's Underground Railroad, the abolitionist movement here. And it's this kind of living document that I'm still even researching now. I add to it. I try to, every time I do a presentation, I try to present some type of new information, something I've found most recent.
So tell us a little bit about what you've learned about the Underground Railroad and the abolitionist movement as it relates to Peoria. There's some interesting facts that I think the viewers would love to hear about. So
Peoria was a very divided city back in the 1840s, 1850s, and 1860s. Most of the population here leaned Democrat, which would have had sympathies with the southern states and the slaveholders. So it made it very hard for an abolitionist to operate. In fact, one historian wrote about Peoria as being the second most dangerous town to be an abolitionist in, outside of Alton, Illinois. There were riots. There were murders. There were all kinds of incidents where people would have threats against their life. It was just a very dangerous place to be if you were an abolitionist. If you were found to be an abolitionist, people would boycott your store or your business, or try to vandalize your home or threaten your family.
So the conductor, what role did he play during the movement?
So Moses Pettengill, being the conductor, he lived pretty close to the riverfront. So his role would be to meet runaway slaves as they crossed the river. Tazewell County is right across the river from us. So he would have friends and people coordinating their efforts to get runaway slaves across the Illinois River, and where he would meet the runaway slaves. He would hide them in his house, give them food, warm clothes if necessary, and then take them to the next stop out of Peoria. His role was to keep them safe, keep informed on any kind of slave catchers that might be in the area. There's one story where he does meet, there's 3 runaway slaves that they're crossing the river. Once they get to the shore, 2 slave catchers pop out of this swampy area, and they actually capture 2 of the slaves, but Moses is actually able to get one to his house. So he had to be up to date on all the information from outside sources on where these slave catchers were in order to complete his job.
So as you studied this topic, what or how do you feel about, like currently we see in this country where there are, in some states at least, this kind of movement to kind of remove a lot of this historical information from the classrooms. How do you feel about that?
I do not think that we should really be removing any type of information from the class, unless it's overly offensive, which is kind of subjective to say, but it's a dangerous road to go down when you start removing books and things from a curriculum. And I would really strongly advise thinking about what you're doing before you actually do that.
What areas of history are you most interested in? So of course, when I hear the Underground Railroad and the abolitionist movement, I think about Black history. Is that an area that you study a lot?
Yeah, I've studied like the works of Frederick Douglass, Du Bois. I like the writing. When I've taught classes in sociology, they have this fascinating perspective as sociologists as well. I would say my favorite part in history is the 1830s to the 1860s, because it really is this defining moment in America where on what path we're going to take. Are we going to be a nation that stands up to the ideals it was founded on, or are we going to go the other way and restrict liberties and freedoms for millions of people?
So talk a little bit about that time period. What are some of these significant events and decisions that were made that set us on the path that we're on today?
There were a lot of road bumps in the abolitionist movement. It was a rough course for those who support the abolitionist cause. You had, especially the 1850s. The 1850s, you had the Dred Scott case that basically said that African Americans were not even citizens and they couldn't be seen in court. You had the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which essentially expanded expanded slavery north of the Mason-Dixon line. You had also local communities and states that would impose their own kind of restrictions. In fact, Illinois in the 1840s and 1850s enacted these what's called the Black Codes, and it was just to restrict Black immigration into the state. They would impose penalties if an African American was found without correct papers. They would impose financial penalties, knowing they couldn't pay. If they couldn't pay, somebody would pay for them, and they would have to work off their debt. So it was almost like this roundabout slavery in Illinois because of these Black Codes. So it was just this very long and arduous road that did finally set us up for the Civil War and ultimately the liberation of slaves.
So you mentioned Frederick Douglass. What do you find, I guess, most intriguing about studying him as a historical figure?
Frederick Douglass was a very fascinating person. He would go around with some of these traveling, they called them itineraries. They would traveling missionaries, and he would, as a Black, well-spoken man, for someone in the 1830s, 1840s, that would create a very, that would make people uncomfortable when he would enter a town and he would speak. He came to Peoria in the 1850s and spoke here in Peoria. I think he's just, his push just to move anti-slavery forward is just very, very compelling.
And what about W.E.B. Du Bois?
W.E.B. Du Bois, his views after the emancipation of slaves on how do we go forward from there was very fascinating to read. It's he kind of has this debate with Booker T. Washington on what's the proper move we should go in, especially the education of young Black kids. Right. And they both recognized that in order to advance their cause, they had to promote education, but they had different ways about doing it. Booker T. Washington, he was a little bit more reserved, while Du Bois, he wanted a more kind of radical, I guess back then radical, but now we call it more equal, form of education. And just reading about their two views and their reasons behind it is always fascinating, both as a historian and reading it from a sociological standpoint.
Why do you think it's important to study history and learn these stories, etc.? Why do you feel that that's important?
I think I'm not going to say that history repeats itself, because no event is a mirror image of the other, but there are definitely events that can happen that will allow us to see what these decisions can be made, what they'll cause. So it does give us a glimpse into, if we make decision X, then how is that going to pan out? What are going to be the repercussions? Are there going to be any unintended consequences because we did this? I think history allows for this. And also, I think the people that really that are in the books of history, their stories don't need to be forgotten. They were important people. They did really great things, and they should be celebrated and spoken of.
Right. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I do want to talk about your role at the Peoria Historical Society. Talk to me about your job and your role there as a tour guide and other areas that you may work in.
For the Peoria Historical Society, I started off and still do historic tours of our home on Moss Avenue. Then I branched off. We do city tours, whether that be walking tours or bus tours. One of some of the most interesting tours we have is in what's called Springdale Cemetery. It's the second oldest chartered cemetery in Illinois. It dates all the way back to the early 1850s. These beautiful monuments and grave sites that you can walk through and you're almost like in a park-like setting. So we talk about some of the people that are laid to rest there. My favorite one to do in the summertime is in Springdale Cemetery, and it's a Civil War tour, and kind of highlight some of the locals who had influence during the Civil War, because the Civil War during the 1860 to 1865, it was definitely a contentious place to be in Peoria, and kind of filled with suspicion.
No, tell me about the historical home that you tour.
So the historical home, it was built in 1868. It was built by Moses Pettengill. His original property, the actual site of the Underground Railroad, which is now where the Civic Center now stands in downtown Peoria, he sold that property and bought the Moss Avenue property in 1862, completed the house in 1868, and he lived there with his wife and adopted son until he passed away in 1883. It's went through 7 different owners until the last owner, Jean Marone, she passed away, and the executors of her will donated the house along with all its content to the Peoria Historical Society.
Do you, so you all receive a lot of donations of historical properties and artifacts, et cetera, or?
We have 2 properties, the Moss Avenue one, and then we also have one on Glen Oak. It's the Flanagan House. It's the oldest house in Peoria. It's from 1837. Besides that, we have a lot of artifacts that get donated, or most of them are donated. Some people, the volunteers, bring them in if they find something interesting.
What are some of the things that people love to come and see and and visit the society for?
So the home that I give a tour, people love the fact that Moses Pettengill was an abolitionist and a conductor in the Underground Railroad, but also we get a lot of positive reactions that the house was actually the wedding site to where Cynthia Stone and Jack Lemmon were married. Jack Lemmon being the actor.
And so, of the historical figures that you study, and I know you've studied quite a few, who are the most significant figures in your mind, and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. Locally or nationally?
Well, let's do both. Let's do a local and a national.
Okay. Locally, I would have to say, and I'm probably biased here, Moses Pettengill. Moses Pettengill, he worked for 3 decades on trying to on the emancipation of slaves. He not only did that, but he built after slavery was abolished. He built a school that people could go to, no matter their race, no matter their gender. So he was very much an advocate for equal protection, equal rights. So I would say Moses Pettengill is locally the most my favorite. A lot of people would maybe argue that, but I think he's definitely my favorite.
And take about 30 seconds and tell me about your national figure.
My national figure, it's going to be very cliche, but Abraham Lincoln, for a man who went through so much trials in his life, from his kids dying, one while he was in the White House, one while he was fighting a war, to his wife having severe depression. He was faced with a lot of hard decisions, and he was able to keep the country together without imposing any kind of really undemocratic ways. So I would say Abraham Lincoln nationally is one of my favorites.
Corey, look, I appreciate this moment in history with you. It's been a great way to kind of wrap up Black History Month. And so I want to take the time to thank you for joining me on this episode of Self-Made. And to my viewers, I want to thank you for watching this episode of Self-Made with Dee Brown CEO. And remember, without you, there's no me.